Welcome to Revenge Kitchen, where every betrayal gets cooked to perfection. Vincent Kellerman had always prided himself on reading the fine print. 23 years in corporate compliance had trained him to spot inconsistencies, to detect the subtle patterns that revealed when someone was gaming the system. So when his wife Elena started leaving her phone face down during dinner, when she began showering immediately upon returning from her evening strategy sessions, when she started wearing that particular shade of lipstick she'd abandoned years ago, Vincent noticed. He noticed everything. The first red flag appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. Elena had been working late again, something about a crucial presentation for potential investors. Vincent was helping their 7-year-old daughter Iris with her math homework when Elena's phone, forgotten on the kitchen counter, buzzed with a text. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, same place, D." Vincent stared at the screen, his analytical mind immediately cataloging details. The message had arrived at 9:47 p.m. Elena had said she'd be home by 9:30. The sender was listed simply as D with a heart emoji, something Elena had never used in their contact list, not even for him. "Daddy, you're crushing my pencil," Iris said, looking up at him with those discerning green eyes she'd inherited from her mother. Vincent loosened his grip, smiled at his daughter, and filed the information away in the methodical way he approached all anomalies. One data point meant nothing. Patterns, however, told stories. Over the following weeks, Vincent's internal auditor awakened. He began documenting with the same precision he brought to corporate investigations. Elena's departure times, typically 6:45 p.m. for client dinners that used to happen during lunch hours. Her arrival times, never before 11 p.m., often closer to midnight. Her explanations, increasingly elaborate, featuring new characters and shifting details that didn't align with previous stories. The most damning evidence emerged during their regular Saturday morning coffee routine. Elena was scrolling through her phone while Vincent read the financial section when she suddenly laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound he hadn't heard in months. "What's funny?" he asked, genuinely curious. Elena's expression shifted, that practiced smile sliding into place like a mask. "Oh, just a meme Tommy shared in the work group chat." Vincent knew Elena's work team. There was no Tommy. That night, while Elena showered, Vincent experienced what he would later recognize as his moral event horizon. He picked up her phone, unlocked because she'd always trusted him completely, and scrolled through her messages. The conversation thread with Derek A. told a story Vincent's analytical mind assembled with devastating clarity. 6 months of escalating intimacy. Shared jokes about Vincent being predictably punctual and emotionally unavailable. Photos of hotel rooms. Plans that aligned perfectly with Elena's claimed work schedule. But it was the most recent exchange that crystallized his response. "Derek, your husband seems like the type who'd make a scene if he found out." Elena, Vincent? No way. He'd probably schedule a meeting to discuss it rationally. He's incapable of spontaneous emotion. Vincent set the phone down with steady hands, listening to the water running in their master bathroom. Elena was wrong about many things, but she'd accurately assessed his nature. He wouldn't make a scene, he'd architect one. Vincent approached his investigation with the same systematic thoroughness he brought to compliance audits. He created a spreadsheet, encrypted and stored on a secure drive, documenting dates, times, discrepancies, and corroborating evidence. He installed a location tracking app on Elena's phone during one of her morning showers, using her fingerprint while she slept. The app revealed a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Elena's phone pinged from the Grandview Hotel downtown, staying there for exactly 3 hours before moving to her actual office. He learned about Derek Ashford through public business records and LinkedIn. 44 years old, divorced, founding partner of Ashford Capital, which had recently invested in Elena's marketing firm. Derek specialized in high-growth opportunities, and based on his social media presence, expensive wines and weekend sailing trips. Vincent's compliance training had taught him that financial irregularities often accompanied personal ones. A review of their joint credit card statements revealed charges at restaurants Elena claimed never to have visited, jewelry purchases she'd never worn at home, and a recurring payment to a storage unit facility Vincent had never heard her mention. The storage unit discovery required Vincent's most elaborate deception yet. He told Elena he was visiting his mother for the weekend, then spent Saturday afternoon conducting surveillance. Elena drove to the facility at 2:30 p.m., staying for 45 minutes. When she left, Vincent used bolt cutters he'd purchased with cash to access the unit. Inside, he found what amounted to Elena's alternate life. Expensive clothes still bearing price tags, professional photography equipment he recognized from Derek's social media posts, and a laptop containing financial projections for a business venture Elena had never mentioned. But the most illuminating discovery was a handwritten journal. Elena's journal entries revealed a woman Vincent barely recognized. She wrote about feeling suffocated by predictability and starved for spontaneity. She described Derek as everything Vincent isn't: passionate, unpredictable, willing to take risks. But the entry that solidified Vincent's resolve was dated just 2 weeks prior. Derek thinks I should leave Vincent, but I'm not ready for that disruption. Vincent provides stability for Iris, and honestly, the financial security is important while we're building the business. I can have both for now: passion with Derek, security with Vincent. Neither has to know about the other. Vincent photographed every page before carefully returning everything to its original position. The annual Kellerman family reunion had been Vincent's mother Margaret's tradition for 37 years. Held at the sprawling family property in Millbrook, it typically drew 50-plus relatives for a weekend of forced conviviality and passive-aggressive competitions over career achievements and child-rearing philosophies. Vincent had always found these gatherings tedious, but this year he'd volunteered to help coordinate. Specifically, he'd insisted on managing the traditional Saturday evening dinner and toast ceremony. Elena, assuming this represented one of Vincent's characteristic attempts to control social situations, had been supportive. "It's sweet that you want to make a speech," she'd said, adjusting his tie that morning with the kind of intimate gesture that now felt like performance art. "What are you planning to say?" Vincent had smiled, kissing her forehead, something memorable. The reunion unfolded according to Vincent's carefully orchestrated timeline. Relatives arrived throughout Friday, settling into the familiar rhythms of family drama. Elena played her role perfectly: the devoted wife, doting mother, successful career woman. She charmed Vincent's cousins with stories about her marketing campaigns, helped organize the children's treasure hunt, and posed for countless photos with that radiant smile Vincent now recognized as carefully calculated. Saturday evening's dinner featured Margaret's famous pot roast, 3 types of wine, and the kind of multi-generational chaos that typically ended with someone crying and someone else threatening to never attend one of these things again. Vincent waited through the meal, making pleasant conversation while his internal countdown approached 0. When Margaret called for the traditional toast, a Kellerman family custom where the host offered gratitude and family updates, Vincent stood with the confidence of a man who'd prepared for this moment with forensic precision. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he began, his voice carrying easily across the dining room. "Family means everything to me: loyalty, honesty, the bonds we choose to honor." Elena beamed at him from across the table, Iris coloring quietly beside her. "I especially want to thank my wife Elena," Vincent continued, "for teaching me so much about myself this year, for showing me what loyalty looks like and what it doesn't." The first hint of confusion flickered across Elena's face. Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. "Elena, you once told someone that I was incapable of spontaneous emotion. You were wrong about that, but absolutely right about my nature. I don't make scenes, I prepare presentations." He connected his phone to the portable speaker he'd brought for the occasion, which he'd told everyone was for background music during dinner cleanup. "This first recording," Vincent announced, "is from last Tuesday evening." Elena's voice filled the room, crystal clear through the Bluetooth speaker. "Vincent has no idea. He's so caught up in his routines, he couldn't spot an affair if I left Derek's underwear on his pillow." Derek's laughter followed. "Maybe we should test that theory." The dining room had gone completely silent. Vincent's elderly Uncle Harold was leaning forward, cupping his ear. Cousin Janet had her mouth open, a forkful of green beans suspended halfway to her lips. Elena had gone completely pale. "This next recording," Vincent continued with the calm delivery of a quarterly financial report, "is from yesterday morning." Elena's voice: "The reunion will be perfect cover. Vincent will be so focused on impressing his family, he won't notice I'm texting you all weekend." "Derek, what if he finds out?" Elena, he won't. And even if he did, Vincent would never make a public scene. He'd probably schedule a private meeting to discuss our relationship going forward like it's a business merger. Vincent paused the recording. Elena, meet spontaneous Vincent. The explosion of family reaction was everything Vincent had calculated it would be. His mother, Margaret, gasped and clutched her pearls. His brother Daniel shouted, "Holy shit!" loud enough to wake the neighbors. Elena's sister, Rachel, started crying. Various aunts and uncles erupted in simultaneous conversations, creating a cacophony of moral outrage and gossip excitement. But it was Iris who provided the moment Vincent hadn't prepared for. "Daddy," she said in that clear 7-year-old voice that cut through the chaos, "why is Mommy crying?" The room fell silent again. Vincent looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw confusion, fear, and something that might have been disappointment. Not in Elena, in him. Elena seized the moment, pushing back from the table and rushing toward Iris. "Baby, Daddy is confused about some things. We'll talk about it later." "No," Vincent said, his voice sharper than intended. "Iris needs to understand that lies have consequences." "Vincent, stop," Elena pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Not like this, not in front of everyone, not in front of her." But Vincent's presentation wasn't complete. He had more recordings, financial evidence, photographs from the storage unit. He'd prepared a comprehensive exposure that would leave no room for Elena's manipulation or gaslighting. What he hadn't prepared for was his mother's voice, cutting through the family chaos with the authority that had governed Kellerman gatherings for nearly 4 decades. "Vincent Michael Kellerman," Margaret said, her tone carrying the weight of maternal disappointment that could still reduce him to childhood shame at 52. "That is enough." The aftermath of Vincent's presentation played out in the fragmented chaos he'd anticipated, but not quite as he'd orchestrated. Elena fled to the guest bathroom, where she remained locked for 45 minutes while various female relatives took turns knocking and offering support. Iris, confused and overwhelmed, attached herself to Vincent's leg and refused to let go. But the evening's revelations weren't finished. Vincent's brother Daniel, perhaps inspired by the evening's theme of uncomfortable truths, chose that moment to announce his own marital difficulties. Cousin Janet revealed she'd been in therapy for depression. Uncle Harold, emboldened by wine and the general atmosphere of confession, admitted he'd been having inappropriate feelings about his neighbor's wife. The Kellerman family reunion had become a therapeutic intervention nobody had requested. Margaret, demonstrating the crisis management skills that had held the family together through decades of drama, assigned rooms and sleeping arrangements with military efficiency. Elena would stay in the main house with Iris. Vincent could use the guest cottage. Family members who wanted to leave early were free to do so, but anyone staying needed to follow house rules. No more public confrontations, no recording devices, and absolutely no discussion of the evening's events until everyone had slept. At 11 p.m., Vincent found himself alone in the cottage he'd played in as a child, staring at his phone and wondering why his moment of triumph felt so much like defeat. A knock on the door interrupted his brooding. He expected Elena, or possibly his mother, arriving to deliver one of her legendary guilt-inducing lectures. Instead, he found Tommy Chen, his best friend since college, holding 2 bottles of beer and wearing the expression of someone who'd been voluntarily recruited for crisis management. "Your mom called me," Tommy said, inviting himself inside. "Figured you might need someone who's been through a divorce to talk sense into you." Vincent accepted the beer and settled into the cottage's ancient recliner. "How much did she tell you?" "Enough to know you've lost your fucking mind," Tommy replied with the brutal honesty that had characterized their 25-year friendship. "Public humiliation at a family reunion, Vincent? Really? What's next, hiring a skywriter?" "She deserved to be exposed," Vincent said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. "Maybe, but did Iris deserve to watch her world explode in front of 50 relatives?" The question hit Vincent like a physical blow. All his careful planning, his methodical evidence gathering, his perfect execution, none of it had accounted for the look on his daughter's face when she asked why Mommy was crying. "I wanted justice," Vincent said quietly. "No," Tommy replied. "You wanted revenge. There's a difference, and you know it." They drank in silence for several minutes, the cottage's familiar sounds, creaking floorboards, humming refrigerator, distant family conversations. providing a soundtrack for Vincent's growing realization that his carefully planned victory had become something else entirely. "Elena betrayed me," Vincent said eventually. "She made me a fool." "Elena fucked up," Tommy agreed. "But you chose to become someone I don't recognize. The Vincent I know protects his family, even when they disappoint him. He doesn't weaponize a 7-year-old's sense of security." Vincent stared at the cottage ceiling, where glow-in-the-dark stars from his childhood still clung stubbornly to the paint. "I found evidence she's been planning to leave me anyway. The affair was just entertainment until she was ready for the divorce." "So you decided to burn everything down first." "I decided to control the narrative." Tommy finished his beer and set the bottle on the coffee table with more force than necessary. "Vincent, listen to me. I've been where you are. Sarah cheated, lied, made me feel like an idiot for believing in our marriage. But you know what I learned? The person you become in response to betrayal, that's who you really are. Elena showed you who she is. Tonight, you showed everyone who you are." The words hung in the air like an accusation Vincent couldn't refute. Sunday morning at the Kellerman family property typically featured Margaret's famous blueberry pancakes, strong coffee, and the kind of carefully managed small talk designed to smooth over Saturday night's dramas. This Sunday, however, Margaret announced she was making Eggs Benedict, a meal that required individual attention and provided natural opportunities for private conversations. Vincent arrived at the main house kitchen to find his mother already dressed and organizing ingredients with military precision. Elena was notably absent, as was Iris. "They're still sleeping," Margaret said without looking up from her hollandaise preparation. "Elena cried until nearly 3 a.m. Iris finally fell asleep around 2. Vincent poured himself coffee from the ancient percolator Margaret refused to replace, noting the familiar weight of maternal judgment in the kitchen's atmosphere. "I suppose you're going to tell me how disappointed you are," he said. Margaret paused her whisking, fixing Vincent with the look that had disciplined 3 generations of Kellerman children. "Vincent, I'm going to tell you a story you've never heard. Then you're going to decide if you want to spend the rest of your life being the kind of man who destroys his daughter's sense of security to prove a point." She gestured toward the breakfast nook where Vincent had eaten countless childhood meals. "Sit." Vincent obeyed, recognizing the tone that brooked no argument. Margaret continued her hollandaise preparation while she spoke, her movements precise and economical. "Your father cheated on me." The words hit Vincent like cold water. Harold Kellerman had been the family's moral compass, the man who'd taught Vincent about integrity, loyalty, and keeping one's word. The idea of his father as an adulterer seemed fundamentally impossible. "When," Vincent managed, "throughout our marriage, 3 different affairs that I knew about, probably others I didn't. The longest lasted 4 years. Margaret's voice carried no bitterness, just the matter-of-fact tone she might use to discuss grocery lists. "The first time I found love letters in his coat pocket. I was 28, you were 3 years old, and I had 2 choices. Create a public scandal that would destroy our family or find a way to save our marriage privately." She began assembling the Benedict with practiced efficiency, layering English muffins, Canadian bacon, and perfectly poached eggs. "I chose privacy. I confronted your father, demanded he end the affair, and insisted we attend counseling. He did, we did, and our marriage survived." Vincent struggled to process this revision of his family history. His parents had always seemed solid, united, the kind of partnership he'd tried to model with Elena. "The second affair happened when you were in high school. Your father's secretary, classic cliché. This time, I hired a private investigator, gathered evidence, and presented him with a choice. End it immediately and transfer to the Boston office, or I'd file for divorce and ensure everyone in his professional circle knew why." Margaret placed the finished Benedict in front of Vincent, the hollandaise perfect despite her emotional revelations. "He chose to transfer. We moved to Boston, you finished high school there, and your father spent the next 5 years rebuilding my trust." "And the third time?" Vincent asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. 2 years before he died, a widow from his book club, I found hotel receipts in his wallet." Margaret sat across from him with her own plate, meeting his eyes directly. "This time I made a different choice." Vincent waited, his Benedict growing cold. "I realized that your father's infidelity was about his own weaknesses, not about our marriage or my worth as a wife." I also realized that I'd spent 25 years managing his betrayals instead of deciding whether I wanted to stay married to someone who kept betraying me. She took a measured bite of her breakfast. So I told him I knew that I was tired of protecting him from consequences and that he could either commit completely to our marriage or we could divorce with dignity. No ultimatums, no threats, no public scenes. Just honest conversation between two adults who'd spent 30 years building a life together. What did he choose? Margaret's smile carried decades of complicated love and hard-won wisdom. He chose me, really chose me for the first time since we'd gotten married. We had 7 wonderful years before the cancer took him, the best years of our marriage, actually. Vincent stared at his untouched breakfast, trying to reconcile this story with everything he'd believed about his family. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because children don't need to carry their parents' marital struggles. Because your father was a good man who made bad choices, and I saw no reason to complicate your relationship with him. Because some things are private, Vincent, even between people who love each other. The kitchen fell silent except for the distant sounds of family members stirring upstairs. Vincent could hear Elena's voice, soft and gentle, helping Iris get dressed. Last night, Margaret continued, you made Elena's private betrayal into public entertainment. You turned your daughter's family crisis into a performance for relatives who will gossip about this for years. You chose revenge over resolution, drama over dignity. Vincent finally took a bite of his Benedict, tasting nothing. Elena was planning to leave me anyway. She was using me for financial security while she built a new life with Derek. Perhaps, but that was Elena's choice to make, just as your response was yours. You could have confronted her privately. You could have demanded couples counseling. You could have filed for divorce with dignity. Instead, you chose to become someone your daughter will remember as the man who humiliated her mother in front of the entire family. Margaret reached across the table and covered Vincent's hand with hers. I'm not defending Elena's choices, Vincent. What she did was wrong. But what you did last night, that was cruel. And cruelty is always a choice. Children see everything and understand more than adults assume. Iris Kellerman, at 7 years old, had already begun forming her own theories about the strange weekend at Grandma Margaret's house. She knew Mommy had been crying a lot lately, even before the big dinner when Daddy played those recordings. She'd seen Mommy texting someone late at night, smiling at her phone in a way that made Iris feel excluded. She'd noticed the new perfume, the prettier clothes, the way Mommy seemed to be waiting for something exciting to happen. But she'd also noticed that Daddy had been different too, more watchful, more careful with his words. Sometimes she'd catch him staring at Mommy with an expression she couldn't identify, something between sadness and anger that made her stomach feel tight. The night of the big dinner, when Daddy played Mommy's voice through the speaker, Iris had understood enough to know that her parents were in serious trouble. She didn't understand all the words. What was an affair? What did betrayal mean? But she understood emotions, and the room had filled with the kind of adult anger that made her want to hide. What confused her most was how proud Daddy had seemed, standing there while Mommy cried. In Iris's understanding of fairness, making someone cry was wrong, even if they'd done something bad first. When her friend Madison had taken her favorite crayon without asking, Iris had told the teacher rather than snatching it back and breaking it. That's what Daddy had always taught her. 2 wrongs don't make a right, pumpkin. Sunday morning, Iris woke early and found her grandmother in the kitchen making fancy eggs. Grandma Margaret always told the truth, even when it was complicated, so Iris asked the question that had kept her awake most of the night. Grandma, are Mommy and Daddy getting divorced? Margaret paused her cooking, considering her response with the care she brought to all conversations with Iris. I don't know, sweetheart. They're having some grown-up problems that they need to figure out. Is it because of what Daddy played on the speaker? It's because your parents made some choices that hurt each other. Now they have to decide if they want to fix their problems or not. Iris absorbed this information with the pragmatic acceptance children display toward adult chaos. If they get divorced, will I still see Daddy every day? No matter what happens between your parents, they will both always love you very much. And I'll always be your grandmother, and this will always be your family home where you can visit. Margaret sat beside Iris at the breakfast nook, offering her a piece of buttered toast. Iris, can you tell me how you're feeling about everything? Iris considered this question seriously. At 7, She was already showing signs of her father's analytical nature and her mother's emotional intelligence. "I'm sad that Mommy lied," she said finally. "But I'm also sad that Daddy was mean to her in front of everyone. It felt like when Marcus at school told everyone about Jennifer's accident during nap time. Even though Jennifer shouldn't have had an accident, Marcus shouldn't have told everyone either." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "That's very wise, Iris. Sometimes when people hurt us, we want to hurt them back, but that doesn't usually make things better. Will Mommy and Daddy stop being angry at each other?" "I hope so, but that's their choice to make. Your job is just to be 7 years old and to remember that both your parents love you very much, even when they're not being very nice to each other." Iris finished her toast, then looked at her grandmother with the directness children bring to important questions. "Grandma, can I ask you to do something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Can you tell Mommy and Daddy that I want them to try to fix their problems instead of just being angry? Because I like living with both of them, and I don't want to have to choose." Margaret felt her heart break a little. "I'll talk to them, Iris, I promise." Derek Ashford had been expecting Elena's Sunday morning phone call, but not the conversation that followed. "It's over," Elena said without preamble. "Vincent knows everything. He played recordings at his family reunion in front of 50 people, and I'm done pretending this was ever a good idea." Derek, calling from his downtown apartment while reviewing financial reports, set his papers aside. "Elena, slow down. What recordings? How did Vincent?" "He's been investigating us for months. He had our conversations recorded, tracked my location, found the storage unit. Derek, he knew everything. He probably knew before we did." The admiration in Elena's voice surprised Derek. Throughout their 6-month affair, she'd consistently portrayed Vincent as boring, predictable, emotionally distant. The idea of Vincent conducting a sophisticated surveillance operation didn't align with Elena's descriptions. "Where are you now?" Derek asked. "Still at his family's property. Vincent slept in the guest cottage last night. I stayed in the main house with Iris. His mother made breakfast and gave me the kind of lecture that made me feel like I was 7 years old." Derek had met Margaret Kellerman once. At a charity function, Elena had dragged him to early in their relationship. He remembered an elegant woman with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "What did she say?" "That I'd made choices that hurt my daughter, that adultery was selfish regardless of my marital problems, and that if I wanted to rebuild my life, I needed to start by taking responsibility for destroying it." Elena's laugh carried no humor. "She also said Vincent's public humiliation stunt was cruel and that he damaged Iris more than I had." Derek found himself in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with Vincent's mother. The affair had been exciting precisely because it felt transgressive, but he'd never intended to participate in destroying a family. Elena's marriage problems weren't his responsibility, but her daughter's emotional well-being was something he couldn't ignore. "Elena, maybe we should have ended this months ago." "You're right, I know you're right, Derek, being with you felt like being myself again. With Vincent, I'm this careful, managed version of myself. Everything is scheduled, analyzed, optimized. With you, I could be impulsive and passionate and irresponsible," Derek finished quietly. The silence stretched between them, filled with 6 months of excitement they both now recognized as unsustainable. "I need to figure out how to rebuild my daughter's sense of security," Elena said finally. "That means ending our affair, probably ending my marriage, and definitely facing consequences I've been avoiding." Derek respected Elena's decision, even as he felt the loss of something that had brought genuine happiness to both their lives. "Elena, for what it's worth, I think you're a good mother and a good person who made some bad choices. That doesn't make you a bad person." Vincent would disagree. "Vincent is dealing with his own pain. But from what you've told me about Iris, she's smart enough to see that both her parents made mistakes. Kids are usually more forgiving than we deserve." After ending the call, Derek found himself thinking about Vincent Kellerman, not as the cuckolded husband he'd been mocking in private conversations, but as a man whose methodical approach to crisis had revealed depths Elena had never recognized. The Vincent who could conduct months of surveillance while maintaining normal family routines wasn't the emotionally unavailable husband Elena had described. He was someone whose emotional investment ran so deep that betrayal triggered sophisticated retaliation. Derek made his own decision that morning. He drafted an email to Vincent, formal, respectful, taking full responsibility for his role in the affair and offering to withdraw from any business dealings with Elena's firm. It wasn't enough to repair the damage, but it was a gesture toward the kind of accountability Elena was choosing for herself. By Sunday afternoon, the extended Kellerman family had largely dispersed, leaving behind the kind of awkward family legend that would define reunions for decades. Vincent and Elena remained at Margaret's insistence, partly because Iris needed stability, and partly because Margaret had declared that anyone involved in Saturday night's drama would stay until they'd attempted adult conversation. The forced reconciliation meeting took place in Margaret's living room at 3 p.m., with ground rules that could have governed international peace negotiations. No interrupting, no personal attacks, no recording devices, and absolute focus on Iris's welfare above all other considerations. Margaret served as mediator, a role she'd never requested, but accepted with the resignation of someone who'd spent 40 years managing Kellerman family crises. Elena spoke first, her prepared statement delivered with the kind of professional composure she brought to client presentations. "I want to acknowledge that I betrayed Vincent's trust, violated our marriage vows, and made choices that put our daughter at risk of emotional harm. My affair was selfish and wrong, regardless of whatever marital problems I thought justified it." Vincent listened with the careful attention he brought to compliance reviews, noting Elena's precise language, her acceptance of responsibility, her focus on Iris's welfare. It was everything he'd hoped to hear during the months of discovering her betrayal, yet hearing it now felt anticlimactic. "I also want to say," Elena continued, "that Vincent's decision to expose the affair publicly, especially in front of Iris, was cruel and showed more interest in punishing me than protecting our daughter." Vincent felt his carefully controlled composure slip. "You think I should have protected you from consequences?" "I think," Elena replied with steady calm, "that you should have protected Iris from watching her family explode in front of 50 relatives. I think you should have confronted me privately before turning our marriage into dinner entertainment." Margaret intervened before Vincent could respond. "Elena is right about that, Vincent. Your investigation was thorough, your evidence was comprehensive, but your methods were destructive." Vincent turned to his mother, feeling the familiar childhood sensation of being outnumbered by female logic. "She was planning to divorce me anyway. She was using me for financial stability while she built a new life with Derek. At least this way, I controlled the narrative." "Vincent," Margaret said with patient firmness, "controlling narratives is what you do at work. In marriage, you build trust, communicate honestly, and solve problems together. What you did Saturday night was the opposite of problem solving." Elena reached into her purse and withdrew a folder Vincent recognized, legal documents she'd prepared with characteristic efficiency. "I've drafted divorce papers. 50-50 custody, no spousal support requests, equitable property division. I'm not trying to punish you financially, Vincent. I just want to end our marriage with as little additional damage as possible." Vincent stared at the documents, recognizing Elena's handwriting in the margins where she'd noted Iris's school schedule, holiday arrangements, and summer vacation planning. Even in divorce, she was being methodical and considerate of their daughter's needs. "I have conditions," Vincent said. "Of course you do," Elena replied without sarcasm. "Iris doesn't meet Derek until after our divorce is final, and you've both had time to determine if your relationship is serious enough to involve her. I want regular family therapy sessions to help her process this transition. And I want us to agree that our personal problems stay private. No discussing the affair or Saturday night scene with Iris beyond what's necessary for her emotional health." Elena nodded agreement to each condition. "I also want us to commit to family meetings, not as a couple, but as co-parents. Iris deserves parents who can communicate about her welfare without dragging our personal drama into every conversation." Margaret watched this negotiation with the satisfaction of someone seeing long overdue maturity finally emerge from her offspring. "Vincent, Elena, I want you both to understand something. You're going to spend the next 11 years co-parenting Iris, which means the next 11 years learning to interact with dignity despite your personal feelings. You can choose to do that with grace, or you can choose to do that with ongoing drama. But you will do it, because Iris deserves parents who put her welfare above their wounded pride." Vincent looked at the divorce papers, then at Elena, then at his mother, who'd spent decades modeling the kind of private strength he'd never fully appreciated. "I need to ask Elena something, and I need an honest answer." Elena waited, her posture suggesting she was prepared for any question. "Were you ever planning to work on our marriage, or was the affair always an exit strategy?" Elena considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Vincent, I started the affair because I felt invisible in our marriage. You're brilliant at work, methodical, successful, but at home, you treated our relationship like a project you'd already completed. I felt like I was living with a roommate who happened to share financial responsibilities." Vincent absorbed this feedback with the uncomfortable recognition that Elena's criticism wasn't entirely unfair. "But," Elena continued, "instead of talking to you about feeling neglected, instead of suggesting counseling or making specific requests for change, I chose to find excitement elsewhere. That was cowardly and selfish. If I'd put the same energy into fixing our marriage that I put into hiding my affair, we might be having a very different conversation." "So the answer is yes," Vincent said quietly. "The affair was an exit strategy." "The affair was an escape strategy that became an exit strategy. I was too immature to address our problems directly, so I created bigger problems that would force a resolution." Margaret intervened with the wisdom of someone who'd navigated similar marital crises. "Vincent, Elena, what you're both describing is a marriage that died from neglect before the affair ever started. Elena chose infidelity, but you both chose emotional distance. Neither of you fought for your marriage when it might have been savable." Vincent felt the truth of this observation settle into the spaces his anger had been occupying. His meticulous investigation had focused on Elena's betrayal while ignoring his own contributions to their marital breakdown. "I want to try counseling," he said suddenly. Elena looked surprised. "Vincent, I just handed you divorce papers." "I know, but for Iris's sake, and honestly for our sake, I want to understand how we got here. I want to know if we're divorcing because our marriage was broken or because we never learned how to fix it." Elena looked at the divorce documents, then at Vincent, then at Margaret, who was nodding approval. 6 months of counseling before we finalize anything. 6 months of honest therapy. If we still want to divorce after that, we do it with better understanding of what went wrong. If there's something worth saving, we figure that out too." Margaret smiled for the first time since Saturday evening. "Now you're both acting like adults." Dr. Sarah Whitmore had been conducting couples therapy for 15 years, long enough to recognize when clients arrived carrying more baggage than they could unpack in standard 50-minute sessions. Vincent and Elena Kellerman, sitting on opposite ends of her couch with the careful distance of people managing active hostility, clearly fell into that category. "Before we discuss your specific issues," Dr. Whitmore began, "I want to understand what brought you both to therapy, Vincent." Vincent launched into a precise summary that sounded like a case presentation. "Elena conducted a 6-month affair with her business partner. I discovered evidence through surveillance and exposed the affair publicly at a family gathering. We're here to determine if our marriage is salvageable before proceeding with divorce." Dr. Whitmore noted Vincent's clinical language, his focus on evidence and outcomes, his framing of therapy as investigation rather than healing. "Elena, how would you describe why you're here?" "I made terrible choices that hurt my husband and daughter." Vincent responded by humiliating me in front of 50 relatives. "We're both here because we realized we don't know how to communicate about conflict without destroying each other." Dr. Whitmore appreciated Elena's acknowledgement of mutual destructiveness, a more sophisticated starting point than the blame-focused narratives she usually encountered. "I want to establish some ground rules," Dr. Whitmore continued. "In this room, we focus on understanding rather than winning. We examine patterns rather than prosecuting individual incidents. And we remember that successful therapy requires both people to change, not just the person who initiated the crisis." Over the following weeks, a more complex picture emerged than either Vincent or Elena had acknowledged. Vincent's emotional unavailability was revealed as anxiety about vulnerability, stemming from childhood experiences with his father's emotional volatility. Elena's affair wasn't just about excitement. It was about feeling competent and valued in ways her marriage had stopped providing. But the breakthrough moment came during their 7th session, when Dr. Whitmore asked Elena to describe what she'd loved about Vincent when they first married. His reliability, Elena said immediately. Vincent was the first man I dated who did what he said he'd do. If he promised to call, he called. If he planned a date, every detail was perfect. After years of dating unreliable guys, Vincent's consistency felt like love. And now, Dr. Whitmore prompted, now that same consistency feels like emotional distance. Vincent schedules intimacy, plans spontaneity, manages our relationship like a project. I started feeling like his most successful compliance audit. Vincent had been listening with the focused attention he brought to performance reviews, but Elena's metaphor hit him with uncomfortable recognition. Vincent, Dr. Whitmore said, what did you love about Elena when you first married her? Her passion, Vincent replied without hesitation. Elena threw herself into everything, her work, her friendships, her interests. She brought energy to my life that I didn't know I was missing. When Elena was excited about something, she made everything feel more alive. And now, Vincent considered his words carefully. Now Elena's passion feels unpredictable. She gets excited about things that don't include me, makes plans without consulting me, wants changes I haven't prepared for. I started feeling like she was waiting for me to become someone else. Dr. Whitmore let this revelation settle before continuing. So, Vincent, you fell in love with Elena's passion but tried to manage it into predictability. Elena, you fell in love with Vincent's reliability but grew to resent it as emotional distance. You both tried to change the qualities that attracted you to each other. The recognition that followed was painful but necessary. They'd spent 11 years slowly eroding the foundation of their attraction while blaming each other for the changes they'd demanded. 3 months into therapy, Margaret Kellerman requested a private conversation with Vincent. They met at her house on a Saturday afternoon while Elena took Iris to her writing lesson, creating the kind of neutral space Margaret specialized in for difficult conversations. How is therapy progressing? Margaret asked, serving tea with the ritual formality that marked serious discussions. We're understanding how we got here, Vincent replied. Whether that understanding can fix our marriage is still unclear. Margaret nodded approvingly. Understanding is the first step toward forgiveness, whether that's forgiving each other or forgiving yourselves for not being the people you thought you'd married. Vincent accepted his tea, noting his mother's careful word choice. Do you think we should stay married? I think, Margaret said with characteristic precision, that you should make that decision based on who you both are now, not on who you were when you got married, or who you might become if you change enough to satisfy each other. She settled into her favorite armchair, the one she'd occupied for countless family conversations over 4 decades. Vincent, I want to tell you something about marriage that I learned too late to help your father and me avoid some painful years. Vincent waited, recognizing his mother's storytelling cadence. Marriage isn't a contract that guarantees permanent happiness in exchange for permanent commitment. It's an ongoing negotiation between two people who are constantly changing, constantly growing, constantly becoming different versions of themselves. Margaret paused to sip her tea, organizing her thoughts with the same care she brought to family holiday planning. Your father and I stayed married through his affairs because we kept renegotiating who we were together. Each betrayal forced us to examine whether the people we were becoming still wanted to be married to each other. Sometimes the answer was yes. Sometimes it required significant changes from both of us. Elena says she wants to stay married, Vincent said. She's ended the affair, she's being completely transparent about her communications and schedule, she's putting effort into rebuilding trust. And what do you want, Vincent? The question Vincent had been avoiding crystallized in his mother's living room. I want to stay married to the Elena I fell in love with, but I'm not sure that person exists anymore, and I'm not sure the Vincent she fell in love with exists either. Margaret smiled with the satisfaction of someone hearing her son finally ask the right questions. Then maybe the question isn't whether you can save your old marriage, but whether you want to build a new one with the people you've both become. Vincent stared into his teacup, seeing his own reflection in the amber liquid. What if we can't? What if we try to rebuild and fail? Then you'll know you gave your marriage every possible chance, and you can divorce with dignity instead of destruction. But Vincent, either way, you'll have shown Iris that problems can be addressed with courage rather than cruelty. Margaret reached across the coffee table and covered Vincent's hand with hers. Your public humiliation of Elena was the worst thing you've ever done. Not because Elena didn't deserve consequences, but because you chose revenge over resolution. That's not the man I raised, and it's not the father Iris deserves. Vincent nodded, accepting the judgment he'd been avoiding. How do I fix that? You apologize to Elena for your methods, even if you don't apologize for exposing her affair. You commit to rebuilding trust through actions, not just words. And you remember that forgiveness, of Elena and of yourself, is a choice you make every day, not a feeling that happens automatically. 4 months into their parents' therapy experiment, Iris Kellerman was developing her own opinions about adult relationships. At 7, she possessed the kind of clear-eyed wisdom that hadn't yet been complicated by social expectations or romantic fantasies. Her parents were trying harder. She could see that. Daddy listened more during conversations instead of planning his responses. Mommy asked questions about Daddy's work and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. They attended her school events together, maintained consistent bedtimes and weekend routines, and had stopped using her as a messenger service for communication they were uncomfortable having directly. But Iris also noticed the careful distance they maintained, the way they avoided physical contact except when they thought she was watching, the stilted quality of their interactions that suggested people following scripts rather than expressing genuine emotion. During one of her regular Saturday morning breakfasts with Grandma Margaret, Iris decided to address the situation with characteristic directness. Grandma, are Mommy and Daddy pretending to be happy for me? Margaret paused in her pancake preparation, recognizing one of those questions that required absolute honesty. What makes you think they're pretending, sweetheart? They're being extra nice to each other, but not the way they used to be nice. It's like when I'm extra good after I've done something wrong. It doesn't feel natural. Margaret smiled at her granddaughter's perceptiveness. Your parents are working very hard to fix their problems, Iris. Sometimes when people are learning new ways to treat each other, it can feel a little artificial until the new ways become natural. Do you think they'll stay married? I think, Margaret said carefully, that they're trying to decide if they want to stay married to the people they are now, not just to the people they used to be. That's a very hard decision that only they can make. Iris absorbed this information while drowning her pancakes in syrup. Grandma, can I tell you a secret? Of course, sweetheart. Sometimes I think it might be better if they got divorced. Margaret set down her spatula, giving Iris her complete attention. Why do you think that, Iris? Because when they're trying so hard not to fight, they're not really talking either. It's like they're being polite to strangers instead of being married to each other. At Madison's house, her parents got divorced, but they still laugh together when they talk about Madison's school stuff. Mommy and Daddy don't laugh together anymore. The observation hit Margaret with the force of generational wisdom. Iris was articulating something the adults had been avoiding, that staying married out of obligation rather than genuine affection might be more damaging than divorcing with dignity. Iris, have you talked to your parents about feeling this way? No, because I don't want them to think I don't want them to be married. I just want them to be happy, and right now they seem like they're working really hard to be something they're not. Margaret recognized the impossible position Iris was navigating, wanting her parents' happiness while fearing that expressing her observations might influence a decision that wasn't hers to make. Iris, would you like me to talk to your parents about what you've told me? Not to tell them what to do, but to help them understand how their efforts are affecting you. Iris considered this offer seriously. Can you tell them that I love them both no matter what they decide, but I don't want them to stay married just because they think it's better for me? I can absolutely tell them that. 6 months after beginning therapy, Vincent and Elena Kellerman sat in Dr. Whitmore's office for what they'd agreed would be their final session, before making a definitive decision about their marriage. Where are you both emotionally as we conclude this process? Dr. Whitmore asked. Vincent spoke first, his response carrying none of the clinical detachment that had characterized his early sessions. I understand now that Elena's affair wasn't just about betraying me. It was about trying to find parts of herself that our marriage had somehow lost. I also understand that my response was about control and punishment rather than healing or resolution. He looked at Elena directly for the first time in weeks. I'm genuinely sorry for humiliating you publicly, Elena. You deserved consequences for your choices, but you didn't deserve cruelty. I chose revenge over dignity, and I damaged Iris's sense of security in the process. Elena nodded acknowledgement before responding. Vincent, I'm sorry for betraying your trust and for being too cowardly to address our problems directly. The affair was selfish and destructive, and it created damage that might not be repairable. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I'm also grateful that you exposed it when you did, because it forced both of us to examine whether we were staying married out of love or out of habit. Dr. Whitmore noted the shift in their communication. Direct, honest, focused on accountability rather than blame. What have you learned about yourselves during this process? She continued. I've learned, Vincent said, that I use control as a substitute for intimacy. When I felt Elena pulling away instead of addressing my fear of losing her, I tried to manage her more carefully. I turned our marriage into a compliance audit instead of a relationship. Elena's response revealed similar self-awareness. I've learned that I use excitement as a substitute for communication. Instead of telling Vincent I felt neglected, I created drama that forced a crisis. I chose chaos over the hard work of rebuilding intimacy. Dr. Whitmore smiled, recognizing the kind of breakthrough that made her work meaningful. So you've both identified patterns that contributed to your marital breakdown. The question is whether you want to rebuild your relationship with this new understanding, or whether you want to use this understanding to divorce more constructively. Vincent and Elena exchanged a look that carried 6 months of difficult conversations, painful revelations, and gradual understanding. We've decided, Elena said quietly, that we want to divorce. Dr. Whitmore nodded, noting the absence of anger or blame in Elena's statement. But, Vincent continued, we want to divorce as friends who understand why their marriage didn't work, rather than as enemies who blame each other for its failure. Elena reached into her purse and withdrew the same divorce papers she'd drafted 6 months earlier, now extensively revised through multiple conversations. We've worked out custody arrangements that prioritize Iris's stability. Vincent gets the house. I get the business assets. We split retirement accounts and savings equitably. We've also agreed, Vincent added, to maintain family traditions that matter to Iris, joint birthday parties, shared holidays, coordinated school events. We want her to see that divorce doesn't have to mean the destruction of her family, just a change in how her family is structured. Dr. Whitmore reviewed the papers, impressed by their thoroughness and consideration for their daughter's needs. This represents remarkable growth from where you both started. You're choosing to end your marriage with the kind of care and respect you should have been showing each other all along. Elena smiled sadly. We're better at being divorced than we were at being married. Maybe that's what we both needed to learn. The first annual Kellerman Family Thanksgiving took place at Margaret's house, featuring a carefully orchestrated gathering that accommodated new realities while honoring old traditions. Vincent arrived with his girlfriend Sarah, a colleague from work who appreciated his methodical nature without trying to change it. Elena came alone, having ended her relationship with Derek after realizing that their connection had been based more on rebellion than genuine compatibility. Iris moved between her parents with the easy confidence of a child whose security had been rebuilt through consistent, caring co-parenting. She helped Vincent carve the turkey while chatting with Sarah about her new science project. She assisted Elena in setting the table while updating her about school friends and weekend plans. The most telling moment came during Margaret's traditional gratitude toast, when Iris asked if she could speak. I want to thank Mommy and Daddy for showing me that grown-ups can make mistakes and fix them, even if fixing them means changing everything, she said with 8-year-old solemnity. I also want to thank them for getting divorced in a way that didn't make me feel like I had to choose sides. Vincent felt tears he hadn't expected, recognizing that his daughter's words represented the redemption he'd been seeking since that disastrous family reunion. Most of all, Iris continued, I want to thank Grandma Margaret for making everyone sit in this living room until they learned how to be nice to each other again. Margaret laughed, accepting credit for the family diplomacy that had made this gathering possible. Later that evening, as guests helped with cleanup, Vincent found Elena washing dishes in the kitchen where they'd had countless conversations during their marriage. Elena, he said, picking up a dish towel, I need to ask you something I've been wondering about. Elena waited, continuing her systematic approach to the gravy pot. Do you regret the affair? Elena considered the question seriously. I regret the deception, the betrayal, the damage it did to Iris's sense of security, but I don't regret that it forced us to examine whether our marriage was working for either of us. She handed him the clean pot to dry. Vincent, we were both miserable and pretending otherwise. The affair was a terrible way to address that problem, but at least it forced us to address it. Vincent nodded, recognizing the truth in her response. I regret my revenge more than you regret your affair. Your revenge was cruel, Elena agreed, but it came from genuine pain. My affair was selfish from the beginning. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes. Finding rhythm in the familiar domestic task, they'd performed together hundreds of times during their marriage. Elena, for what it's worth, I think we're both better people divorced than we were married. Elena smiled, the first completely genuine smile Vincent had seen from her in over a year. Vincent, for what it's worth, I think we're going to be excellent co-parents. 3 years after the family reunion that changed everything, the Kellerman divorce had become the family standard for how to end a marriage with dignity rather than destruction. Vincent's cousins consulted him about their own marital problems, seeking advice from someone who'd learned to distinguish between justice and revenge. Elena's business thrived, partly because her partnership with Derek had ended cleanly and partly because she'd learned to address problems directly rather than avoiding them until they became crises. Iris, now 10 years old, split her time between 2 homes where she felt equally loved and supported. She developed an early appreciation for clear communication and conflict resolution, skills that made her a sought-after mediator in playground disputes and classroom disagreements. Margaret Kellerman, approaching 80, took particular pride in having guided her family through its most difficult crisis without losing a single relationship. The guest cottage at the family property now housed a rotating selection of relatives working through their own personal problems, earning it the nickname Camp Margaret among the younger generation. Vincent's new relationship with Sarah developed slowly, built on mutual respect and honest communication rather than the passionate intensity that had characterized his early relationship with Elena. Elena dated occasionally, but focused primarily on building her business and maintaining the kind of close relationship with Iris that had been strained during the affair period. But perhaps most importantly, both Vincent and Elena had learned to apologize, genuinely, specifically, and without expectation of immediate forgiveness. Vincent's public apology to Elena, delivered at the second annual family reunion, became part of Kellerman family lore. Elena's private apology to Iris, acknowledging the ways her choices had threatened her daughter's security, rebuilt trust that continues to deepen. The storage unit Elena had rented during her affair was converted into a college fund savings account. The surveillance equipment Vincent had used to document Elena's betrayal was donated to a local domestic violence shelter. The family reunion toast tradition evolved to include acknowledgments of mistakes made and lessons learned, creating space for honesty within celebration. And every Thanksgiving, Margaret Kellerman looks around her table at a family that learned to choose healing over harm, understanding over blame, and dignity over destruction, even when those choices required admitting uncomfortable truths about themselves and each other. The Kellerman family reunion of 3 years ago is still discussed, but now as an example of how quickly pain can drive good people to cruel choices, and how much courage it takes to choose accountability over victimhood, forgiveness over revenge, and love over the need to be right. Vincent and Elena's marriage died, but their family survived, transformed, reconfigured, but ultimately stronger for having learned that some problems can only be solved by changing everything while preserving what matters most. Revenge or redemption? How do you see it? Comment your view, like the video, and make sure to subscribe so the next powerful story lands right on your screen.